In this video, I'm going to cover off the essential components that you must check before you submit your completed tender document. The first thing that you should check is the compliance criteria. This is the bit that's going to take you out the fastest. If your document is non-compliance, it won't get past the first stage of evaluation, and that's usually conducted by a single officer. It's called a desktop or first pass evaluation. And if you submit a non-compliant document, which you can do by accident, they may use that as an opportunity to strike you out, which means you don't get through to the next stage to have your bid properly evaluated. So the first thing you make sure is all criteria are addressed. That's the compliance criteria and the qualitative criteria. Each criteria has a score assigned against it, and you don't want to score 0 simply because you didn't think that you would respond to that criteria and that they wouldn't notice. Yes, they will. They will notice. Make sure that your offer is in alignment with the scope that they've asked for. Don't think for an instant that if what they've asked for, just because you don't think that that's what they should actually get, don't think for an instant that they'll think that's okay. If that's the case, then you need to submit an alternate bid, and you can't submit an alternate bid in 99.9% of the cases unless you submit a fully compliant bid at the same time. It doesn't matter if what they're asking for is not best practice. Let's leave it at that. It doesn't matter if you think they're stupid for asking for things the way that they've asked for them. It doesn't matter. They've asked for it. That's what they want. They're the buyer. They have the wallet. They have the funds, and they have the power. So give them what they want and make sure that you align with their scope. You should also make sure that all of the compliance criteria is filled out and correctly, because, as I said, there's a first pass evaluation, and they're looking to make sure that all the boxes are ticked. If you don't tick all the boxes, then you don't get passed. You also need to make sure that you haven't altered their order of evaluation criteria, and that you also haven't altered the pricing structure. This is a very common thing that I used to see a lot, where a company didn't price their standard products the way that the buyer has asked for them to be priced, and so they've altered it completely. That's non-compliant, and that will get you thrown out. So if they've asked to have unit prices, then you must give them that. If you want to give them something else, then give them an alternate pricing, but price it initially the way that they've asked for it. You also need to make sure that you've complied with all of the instructions I mentioned earlier. Sometimes they say you can't change the formatting of the document. If that's part of the instructions, then don't. You also need to make sure that who you have submitted as your tendering entity is an actual legal entity as opposed to a brand name. That's another very common thing that I see. And you also need to make sure that you've read the contract. There may be some hidden gotchas in the contract. Don't assume that just because they've submitted a contract that it's fair and equitable. You must read it. And you need to make sure that you are submitting it in compliance with the instructions. For example, sometimes they don't want a PDF, they want a Word document, and they want the pricing as an Excel spreadsheet. So don't PDF the Excel spreadsheet. They want it as an Excel document so that they can then do their own analysis of the pricing, and they don't have to faff around too much in order to be doing the analysis. If they say that it needs to be in 12-point font, make sure it's in 12-point font. So that's the compliance out of the way. You have made sure that the document that you are submitting is in compliance, full compliance with all of their requirements, so that you don't get it tossed out at the first stage. You want to get through that gate. The next thing that I would be looking at is to make sure that the document appears to be the business, that it is very easy to read, that it's very professional looking, and that it is consistent throughout. I have seen tenders in the past that, whilst the information's there, it looks like it was written by 6 different people, and that can be distracting. You don't want the evaluation team distracted and discussing it as if, in terms of, oh, look, this looks like it was written by 6 different people, because that's a red flag to them. If 6 different people wrote the document, then the red flag is that the offer itself isn't coherent, and all 6 people would need to be completely in sync with each other, and that is a red flag. So make sure that it's consistent throughout, that it was written, looks like it was written by one person, it's written in one voice. Otherwise, they'll see that as a red flag. Make sure that your cross-references are accurate. So if you say that to look for such and such on page X, then make sure that that page X exists. There is an easy way to do this using the functionality embedded within Word, and there's a hard way to do it. If you hard code all of your cross-references every time you add another page, then that page is just made inaccurate by one page number. So make sure that everything fits. Another common mistake that I've seen a lot of in the past is where it's obvious that whoever pulled that document together took an offer or a tender that was written for another company, and they've used that as their boilerplate basis, and they've forgotten to replace all of that company's name with your own, or with the bid of the company that you're bidding to, and all that does is annoy them. They see that as, gosh, you can't even be bothered to check the document properly. This is written for somebody else. It's not even written for us. And whilst the information may be good, you've just sabotaged yourself, because you've created a state of annoyance. And believe me, that is not what you want when they are point scoring your response and comparing it to others. Print it and make sure that it looks okay in black and white. Those beautiful photos and images that you're using, you need to make sure that they print up okay in black and white, because if they photocopy it, then or they print it themselves in black and white, you want those images to convey the information that they're intended to convey, and sometimes they don't if they're printed in black and white. Make sure that all of your attachments are meaningful. Now, this is another very common mistake where companies decide that it's easier just to attach a brochure and to say, look, read my brochure. No, that doesn't work. Often the brochures are generic marketing material, and trust me, the evaluation committee is not going to trawl through a 6-page brochure looking for that one nugget of information that they've been told to find. If you do attach a brochure or some other document that has some pertinent, relevant information in there, point them to the exact page and paragraph, and then when you attach the attachment, highlight that page and that piece of information so that it stands out and it's easy to find, because they are not going to spend time trawling through pages and pages looking for information. You have to spoon feed it to them and make it easy for them, because they're busy people and they haven't got time to read stuff that's not relevant and meaningful. If you use jargon or acronyms and they're relevant to your industry, I'd attach a glossary, and just to remove all doubt. In fact, it's better practice to not use jargon or acronyms unless they're well-known acronyms where possible. Some industries, like the telecommunications industry, it's a whole language in itself. You know, the book of acronyms is 1,000 pages long. So where possible, don't use acronyms. Now, the other thing that you need to look for is that your document is professional and it's easy to read. Now, visuals are very, very important in this case. They're not the be-all and end-all. You know, if you come down to the wire where you've You've either got time to get the words right or you've got time to make it look beautiful. Spend it on the words. Don't waste your time on the cosmetics and aesthetics if you are running out of time. But if you do have the time, then it is well worth making your document look interesting and engaging, and the use of color is very helpful in doing that. So here's an example of a cover page and a form of tender page that I've done in an example, and you can see that it's an interesting, pleasing to the eye view of this document. Contrast this to this version, which looks like everybody else's. Not only does it look like everybody else's, but the spacing makes it hard to read. The font itself makes it hard to read. There's no color, there's no visuals to attract the eye, and that makes the brain tire as it's looking for information. So if I put these side by side, you can see same information, exactly the same information on both sides. One just looks better than the other. You should be aiming to make yours look like the left and not the right, unless you are short of time, in which case get the words right and focus on the aesthetics later. Of course, if we work in the right template from the get-go, then the aesthetics become part of the journey. And I have a template on my website that you can use that is already pre-set up with the colors and the headings and the fonts and everything, and that will take 70% of the formatting work out of the job for you. So have a look for that in the course notes. Here's another example. The information on the left is exactly the same as the information, some of the information on the right. On the right, the information is all jammed up close together, makes it a very hard read, especially if you are busy and distracted, whereas the information on the left is much, much easier. So if we have a look at this table here, for example, these are the key input costs. I've put them in a table. So site compliance, remote work sites, PPE, and labour are all represented as headings. Over on the right hand side, you can see here site compliance, remote work sites, PPE, and labour. But on the right hand side, I hope you'll agree, it's much harder to plough through that information. You don't get the gist at a glance, whereas in a table you get the gist at a glance. I've also put a call out box here for key information. I tend to put testimonials throughout the document this way. That makes it much, much more powerful as a persuasion document. Just some notes around readability and clarity. It goes without saying, no spelling errors, no grammatical errors. Having said that, again, if it's down to the wire and it's a case of getting everything proofread or getting the actual content in there, you focus on the content and just run the spell checker over it. There are grammar Nazis in procurement. It kind of goes with the territory. So grammatical and spelling errors, they understand. If you've got 2 or 3 in your document, it's not going to be the difference between getting the work and not getting the work. But if you have a lot, then that's what the grammar Nazi will focus on, and they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. They'll focus on your grammatical and spelling errors, and they will miss your value proposition, and that's the risk that you run. Same with long, unclear sentences. It's a good tip is to read it out aloud, and you'll hear how absurd and mind-numbing long, unclear sentences are. And if you put that in front of someone who has to read your stuff, again, it distracts them and it buries your value proposition in some very unclear mumbo-jumbo. We've talked about this. Make sure your document is clear, readable, and engaging. Use of colour, white space, headings help make it clear, readable and engaging. Make sure that you are clear right at the very beginning what your value proposition is and what your win theme is, because those two key pieces of content have to be woven throughout the entire document. You need to repeat over and over again what your value proposition and your win theme is. It needs to be repeated on every page. So if you're not clear on what it is, they won't be either. And make sure that the benefits to the buyer are very clear. So if they are going to use your solution, if they're going to use your company, what's in it for them, as opposed to using another company that's bigger, more expensive, and has a stronger brand. Navigation is super important. Cannot stress that enough, because the evaluation committee is going through your document and they're point scoring against their criteria. So it's very important that you have all of the information in one place and that they can find it easily. So as a minimum, your document needs a cover page, it needs a table of contents, it needs page numbers, it needs captions and navigation aids, and whatever you can add in under that heading is fine. I mean things like numbering your tables, putting captions to all of your images, and using cross-references where possible. If you tell them to have a look at attachment 6, then make sure that you also tell them what page number that's on, so they don't have to go looking for attachment 6, they go looking for a page number, which is much easier. That's probably enough to cover in a free video. If you want to know more, I've attached a checklist to the course notes, so feel free to download that checklist and use it to run the ruler over the tender that you do next. And if you would like to know more, I suggest that you have a look at some of the other publications that I've got on the website, or let me know, and if you're interested, and I'll let you know when the next course is coming up. Please do let me know what you think of this video. Give me some feedbacks, because we always like to continuously improve, and I'll see you in the next one.